Hello, and welcome to another episode of Legacy's Allure, brought to you by MTG Training Grounds, the educational series dedicated to providing you with all the info on popular decks, strategies, insight, and more for the Legacy format. I am your host, Zachary Cook. This year, Wizards of the Coast blessed the United States with not one, but two Legacy Grand Prix events. Grand Prix Las Vegas is in the record books, and it was an amazing tournament. The metagame was shaken violently with the banning of Sensei's Divining Top, and Legacy players from around the world converged for a tournament destined to make waves. Among those players was today's guest. He's a Legacy enthusiast and a deck brewer at heart, piloting his own masterpiece affectionately titled Dr. Evil. He was able to take the deck to a 16th place finish in Vegas, a stellar finish in a field of over 2,600 players. He's also the lead developer and company owner of Topdecked MTG, a competitive MTG-related phone app and web service. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming today's guest, Lincoln Baxter III. Lincoln, welcome to Legacy's Allure.
Hey Zach, thanks for having me.
So, before we get into the topics, which the topics for this week, for anybody curious, are the app that I mentioned already, the results from Grand Prix Vegas, and we're gonna actually dig in a little bit to this Dr. Evil deck that Lincoln is both the creator and sort of developer for. He's done a lot of legwork making it competitive, and I dare say it finally paid off.
The spicy meatball.
Yes, indeed. So, first things first, let's talk about the Legacy Grand Prix in Las Vegas. Well, we already mentioned what you played. And you finished 16th, but how did you feel about the event? How did it go?
Oh man, overall, I have to say that I was probably more excited about this event than I have been any Legacy tournament in a while. Maybe that's just because I haven't gotten to go to a lot of Grand Prix for Legacy, but also because I knew this was going to be like the biggest thing. And Sensei's Divining Top had just been banned, and I was really excited to see how that unfolded, because I follow the Legacy metagame pretty hard, and I feel like I try to really pay attention to the details. So I was interested to see if what happened was what I thought was going to happen actually happened.
And
for the most part, I think it did. Everyone was so afraid of combo that I actually expected a sort of resurgence of the fair deck with a ton of combo hate. And based on the top 64, we didn't see Storm in the top 64, according to an MTG The Source work that people put together, all the lists and stuff. And there wasn't a whole lot of sneak and show. There was, I think, no elves, just one Allurin. And I think that people were really very prepared, and a lot of things have changed, namely the printing of Leovold, Emissary of Trest, and a couple other cards that have made it a lot harder for combo. Obviously, the Eldrazi decks prey on them too.
Yeah, so in my last podcast, there was a lot of discussion about, like, would combo make a big resurgence, because without miracles, basically the counterbalance lock to sort of suppress a lot of the cheaper or like quicker combo decks. There was the assumption that combo would come back, and most notably, Storm should have made a comeback. But like you alluded to, Storm, although I definitely remember seeing it at the event, it was not a super high finisher overall. There was none in the top 16, and I didn't look at all of the top 64, but it sounds like there was very few or none there as well. So even if the deck was represented, it didn't perform, I guess.
Yeah, and I've heard some other theories about, there aren't a whole lot of people that actually play the deck on a regular competitive basis, because it really takes a dedicated person to learn that skill. Mm-hmm. So I think the sample is probably reduced, which is part of the reason we didn't see a lot of it. But I still think people were pretty scared of combo coming into this event, which is why it got hated out a little bit more. I think, the banning of miracles, people say, okay, well, I can't play the best deck anymore, so what's the next best deck? And usually that's Delver in a field where people really have no idea what's going on, because it's pretty good against everything.
Right, and especially in a new, well, it's not a new Legacy metagame, but it's certainly an altered Legacy metagame. And in general, when a meta shifts, like what happens in Standard every time there's a rotation, or anytime there's like a banning in Standard or in Legacy or Modern, the response that seems to succeed is to have like a very proactive deck, and I would say that Delver is a very proactive deck like that, all of the variants, but it has enough like flexibility to adapt, even if someone shows up with combo decks or something really kind of abusive.
The thing I think that surprised me the most actually was the amount of Stoneblade that made it to the top 16, and also just the amount that I saw of it throughout the event.
Mm-hmm.
I know that it was a very good control deck before Miracles sort of became this oppressive thing on the format,
Mm-hmm.
but I didn't think that people would come back to that so fast. I thought it would take a while for people to put up some results with it locally and then decide, all right, I'll try this out at a big event again. But 2 blue-white / red Stoneblade decks in the top 16 was pretty surprising to me. I actually played a 4-color Deathblade deck in round 3 or 4, I think, and that was a pretty cool match.
Yeah, so there was some talk about, like, with the void left by Miracles, would a new control deck emerge? And on the last episode, we talked about, like, the new, like, Miracles successor, which is still, utilizing the Miracle mechanic. And it was unclear, very, very unclear at the time, whether that would be like strong enough or good enough to survive in the new post top world. And it looks like, based on the results, I would say it has a little bit of power, but it's clearly not the monster it once was. And there definitely is room for different control decks. Most notably, I would say the Blade variants, whether it be like blue-white Stoneblade, Jeskai, Esper, or full-on like 4-color Deathblade style decks. Although, while we're on the topic of Blade decks, I think the most noteworthy, one of the most notable things to take from the event was that, in my opinion, the best Blade deck won. Right? The deck that I feel most like utilizes the Stoneforge Mystic package and really, really just like leverages every ounce of efficiency out of it was Death and Taxes, which ultimately took down the whole event. That's
actually very true. I was thinking when you were saying that, it's like, is it the blue-white red one or the blue-white one? No, it's just the white one.
Yeah, the mono white Stoneblade.
Yeah, exactly.
And I mean, in some ways, the Blade style decks, the new ones, the multicolored, more control, like Brainstorm and so on variants, they haven't really had enough time to flesh out like the optimal list. That's why I'm sure that's why we saw so many different, like you saw the 4-color, the Jeskai, the straight blue-white. Like, people are unsure what the best version is, but at least in my opinion, the best version of a Blade deck is the one that won. I still think Death and Taxes is like the best place for Stoneforge Mystic, but the other versions certainly put up the results to prove their validity as well.
Yeah, the interesting thing about this Death and Taxes list that I'm seeing here is he's running 3 Rest in Peace, so there was a lot of preparation for the graveyard. 2 Council's Judgment in the sideboard, I think, is pretty standard, but 2 Gideon Ally of Zendikar. So he's packing for the graveyard, and he's also packing for these sort of grindy matches where you can't really rely on your things sticking on the battlefield. They might get wiped away, but you land a Gideon, and it's pretty much game over against a lot of decks.
Yeah, so the thing I noticed about the winning list, and I guess we can dig into it just a little bit, is that it's actually not following any of the like online patterns that you see. A lot of the Moto lists are moving to like the very, very heavily into, or very not heavily, but like very confidently, or they're like sticking with the more hateful versions that are like red white or red white and black. So they want like Magus the Moon, yeah, Orzhov Pontiff. Sometimes you see cards like Pian, Karan, Nalar, that kind of stuff. Yeah. But this list is actually very traditional. It's like, it actually looks like what was really popular right before Miracles got banned. So I know a lot of people talked about the results from the MKM, and that Death and Taxes, at least a traditional like stock variant, was losing ground. And I mean, it's possible that, maybe the matchups had a lot of influence on it. You get paired against good matchups all day and you can go far. But this guy, like, he clearly went all the way. So, like, I refuse to believe he had nothing but good matchups the entire day. There had to be some, and the deck just still has a ton of power.
You can see from his sideboard, he's really, really, really just hoping not to ever play elves. There's literally nothing he's got in the sideboard to stop elves, I guess, except for Aethersworn Canonist, but it's like a one. Maybe you can get it with the recruiters, but that's just, there's no board wipes. There's nothing. So I thought that was interesting. He probably did not play elves.
Yeah, and I mean, in reality, like, the matchup's so atrocious. Like, you can, unless you have like slam dunk win the game style cards against your bad matchups, you're probably better off just hoping to dodge them, or like accepting that you're going to have that loss and maybe you'll only see it once, because otherwise like doing too much flexing and sideboarding is just like handicapping yourself versus other matchups where you should be better off and you should have things. Don't like over sideboard for a matchup that you might just lose anyway, right?
And I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but along those lines, it's kind of like my deck with Burn. I just really can't ever win that match, so I don't even try anymore.
Right.
I just hope not to play it. And when I sit down against someone wearing a red t-shirt with a red playmat, red sleeves, I'm just like, you know what, congrats, let's play it out. But
you probably got this already.
Yep.
Okay, so let's look more at the full top 8 and top 16. We've got the top 8 decks consisted of a pair of Grixis Delver, one Teamer Delver, one Blue-Red Delver, one of the traditional like red-green combo lands deck, one what was titled 4-color Control or 4-color Leovold, one Sneak and Show, and like we mentioned earlier, the winner Death and Taxes. Now, in addition to those, the top 8 decks, and I think it's worth going further down the list than that, because top 8 was not a clean cut. Or no, it was. No, it was not. It was not a clean cut. It was at like 39 points, and breakers were everything. So I think everybody with 39 points is probably, or 37 plus points is probably worth mentioning, because those are the decks that all had like 12 wins or more, or at least 12 wins. Additionally, then there was, like you mentioned, the 3 different Stoneblade variants, another lands, another Sneak and Show, a Grixis Delver, and a Grixis, what was termed Crixus Pyromancer, which it looked a lot like the Grixis Delver deck, but it was a little bit more all in on young Pyromancer. So it eschewed the Delvers in order to play like more cantrips and a 4th Pyromancer, and then you on what they termed like Sultai Control or Sultai Lands, but as we all know, or as we will all soon know, is actually called Dr. Evil.
Well, actually, the name that I called it originally was Bug Control Lands, but it got featured online, and actually I didn't even come up with Dr. Evil. Someone else thought of that. They were just like, this deck looks like a pile of making your opponent hate themselves, like going 15 turns and not even killing them, and then finally like miserably finishing them off when they're out of everything to do, which is pretty accurate, so I kind of took it.
Fair enough. I mean, not everybody gets to name their deck. Sometimes you have to take what you're given. So anyway, what do you make out of the top 16? What I mean, we've already talked about it a little bit, but like, what does this collection of decks that clearly rose to the top and succeeded tell you about or what is it, or what can you infer about the new Legacy metagame?
Right. I mean, the word that comes to my head first is just fair. This is a fair top 16. And I mean, I guess Lands isn't really a fair deck. Like, my deck isn't really a fair deck. They're like control decks that kind of abuse value and all this kind of stuff, but there's really no combo. You've got 1 copy of Sneak and Show.
2. There was 1 in the top 8 and another one, yeah.
There it is. And that's really it. And Lands is up here 3 times if you count my deck. And that is in part because I think the theme of this whole event was fair decks. I mean, I played, I think, 7 of 9 matches the first day were fair decks. Mm-hmm. And then I played Depths and the Epic Storm. But Lands does well when there's a lot of Delver and a lot of fair stuff. Mm-hmm. And Death and Taxes does well when there's a lot of like tempo-y stuff that wants to sort of get an early edge and be able to play their spells. off a couple lands, and there was a whole lot of that here. So I'm really not surprised by this top 16 too much. I'm a little surprised by the lack of Storm, I guess, because I don't know exactly what took them out other than what I said earlier, but I would have expected to see at least one copy of that.
So I have a little bit of a theory, and like we talked about earlier, part of the reason I think we didn't see more Storm is that Storm in paper is less common. Like I know on Moto, Storm is much more prevalent, so like you see it more often, and I think then the leagues start to reflect that, where like even though the deck may not have quite the win percentage that you would think, it looks like it does online because there's just so much more of it and there's so many people on it. In paper, there's less people, probably because the deck's not the cheapest to build. I mean, it's not the most expensive deck you can build, but Lion's Eye Diamonds are expensive. It does run a bunch of dual lands, and so like it's not a budget option. Although neither are some of the other decks like Delver and all that. They have a lot of dual lands and that kind of thing as well. But probably even more so is at a Legacy Grand Prix like this, you're going to have a fair number of people who don't play Legacy a lot. Like, and I think that's probably true of a lot of Grand Prix. You get people who, even if they do play Standard, they don't play at that level of Standard all the time. So you're gonna get people who they're just not like very familiar with what they're doing, and the default when you're familiar or like a little gun shy is to go to something that feels like normal Magic, and Delver decks do that. Delver deck does that. Even Death and Taxes starts to feel like a very like traditional. I play creatures, I have some disruptive elements, some removal, and I'm gonna play a more fair like traditional game of Magic. And Storm just doesn't do that. Like you have to do a lot of math. It's very like stack and spell based. It's in your head. So like the only people. Yeah, go ahead.
Before you even start because you're just staring at your hand for 5 minutes.
Right. Yeah. So like that's just not like what someone will bring to a tournament unless they are a dedicated Storm player. Like I don't feel like anybody just picks it up for a Grand Prix. So you just have less people overall that are representing the archetype.
Yeah, I agree with that.
So one thing I noted, and there is some if you can call Sneak and Show a combo deck. I mean, it's probably the like. Well, all my friends like to say it's the most ape of the combo decks. Like it's very all in your face, and the combo is literally like just 2 cards or sometimes. But anyway, that was still represented. So like combo is still alive at least. It's just you're right. It is a little less represented than maybe expected. But really noteworthy is every archetype is here, right? We have combo decks, the more like unfair style stuff. We have control / prison, depending on if you're the blade variants, those are very like control decks. The lands decks, I would argue, are very prison-esque, with a little bit of a combo element to them. And then the whole myriad of aggro / tempo, Delver style decks. They're all there.
I'm a little surprised we didn't see something like a Stompy deck, like a Dragon Stompy or a Mono Red Sneak Attack up here, because this top 8 is really like all these decks have problems with that deck. Like Sneak and Show has a hard time beating that deck because they just can't play Show and Tell. The Blade decks really have to find Force like 20 times or die to a Blood Moon or a Chalice or something like that. So maybe I know it's not a super popular deck, but anything with 8 Blood Moons or Chalices and stuff, I would have kind of hoped to see one of those up here too.
So my theory on that is that those style of decks, while they are incredibly powerful and notably very powerful against Delver decks, is they typically like struggle with consistency issues. So it really takes a good string of luck for one of those to survive like 15 rounds, I think.
And Delver will punish a deck like that for having one draw. Yep. Yeah,
because Delver, like, they don't have very many bad draws. Like, even their mediocre draws seem pretty darn good. And like, if you're a deck that can't fix your draw, you're right. You're absolutely right. They just punish it like as much as you can. So, we mentioned that the Miracles deck was also represented in the top 64, although it didn't make the top 16. There were several of them that made the top 64 though, and if I'm not mistaken, this should be the first of the like major events post top ban where we've seen them put up results like this. So what are your thoughts on the deck? Like, does this prove that it's like legitimate enough to at least exist in Legacy, and is it like a real deck going forward?
Legitimate. That's that's a harsh word. I don't know. I'm of the mindset, being a deck brewer, that any deck is legitimate. You just have to put the work into tuning it and figuring out how to shape it so that you can play the strategy you want to play effectively in the metagame that you're in.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that, number one, Miracles was so broken that they banned it and it's still broken because it's still there.
Right.
They just took some cards out and, put some other removal stuff in. But fundamentally, like, turning to Predict, which is kind of the way Miracles decks were working anyway, turning towards Predict to be like the card engine advantage, combining that with Portent, which serves as both, turning on your combo, the Miracles, also as a lock piece, like an additional 3-deep Jace, where you can just tell your opponent not to draw anything forever. It's a really punishing engine when it gets going, I think. The part about it that I like now is that it doesn't have the ability to lock out your opponent entirely, because that just leads to unfun magic. And like you said, it's in the top 64. It definitely made a great showing. I mean, top 64 was, I think,
X and 3.
Basically X and 3, which is pretty much our record.
Right.
So it did as well as we did, and multiples of it did. So I think I'm excited to see that there are people still dedicated to like the Miracles play style and, being that pure control, or combo control, I guess, really, deck that I think it always has been.
Right. Yeah. So really, it looks like the heart of the deck is still viable. Like, without top, you can still play Terminus. There were definitely people still playing Entreat the Angels. Like that strategy, or that like power level of card is still good enough for Legacy.
Right.
And the enabler, Portent and friends is good enough to like survive in Legacy, it looks like. So really, kudos to Wizards for like noticing the real problem and taking it out. So they took out top, which effectively also took out Counterbalance, which was sort of the, like you alluded to, like the unfun part of Miracles, the more prison aspect of the deck, and it seems to have paid off in dividends now. And
in taking out top, I was a real disbeliever in choosing top in that capacity, because it has so much collateral damage on other decks like Doomsday and Painter Servant and 12 Post and all these other decks that just really struggle to exist now because top is gone. But I can't complain too much, because if you look at what happened to Miracles and you see, okay, well, there's some lists are playing Unexpectedly Absent, some lists aren't. There's just so much more, I feel, there's more space for innovation in that deck itself, and there's more space for innovation in other decks now that they don't have to worry about like getting locked out by Counterbalance. And anytime you can increase the space for innovation in a format is, I think, a good thing. And I think that we're seeing this means that Legacy is very healthy right now.
Right, and I mean, there's going to be casualties, when you have to make some sort of decision like that, like collateral damage, if you will, like you mentioned with like decks like Painter and stuff. But this really looks like it has the like opening effect, where you closed a door on a very oppressive archetype, or what most would argue was a very oppressive archetype, and that really just it didn't just open a window, it opened a lot of windows. Now it may have also closed the door on some of these other like decks, but that doesn't mean that they're totally invalid. They're probably just weaker, and on the whole, it's probably going to mean long term that there is actually more viable than there was before. I don't think those decks suffering as collateral damage is a good enough argument anymore because like you said, like we still have a control deck, and we have so many other decks flourishing as a result. And who knows? Like, this is only the first major event. There could be a whole new like strategy or a new archetype, a new deck that comes into existence. Either because Miracles is gone, or because people are now willing to innovate. Like, they don't just assume that their strategy is no longer viable, or right. Isn't viable. Like they may actually be willing to brew or try something, whereas before they thought, well, I would like to try this, but it probably isn't good enough against Miracles or against the top deck. So like, I'm not even going to give it a shot. I'm just going to go with Old Faithful here and keep working with some deck that I know is already good enough.
Right. Yeah, and I think we are seeing that, because these Deathblade and Stoneblade decks, the 4-color Leovold decks, they're all looking different than they used to. Like the Rug Delver list that got 5th place, Patrick Tierney, the guy who actually was my round 15, he's playing some copies of True Name Nemesis in Rug Delver.
Yep. Like
that's a 3-mana spell in Rug Delver. You don't see that, or we would never see that before.
Nope. Miracles
was gone, and then the format sort of opened up. And actually, I think that Miracles kind of pushed Rug Delver out of the format in the first place. But it's an exciting time.
Right. So speaking of decks that, or speaking of brewing new decks and sticking with it, and seeing what works. Now, you're actually an anomaly here. You've stuck with a deck and made it into a thing despite Miracle's existence. Now, whereas earlier I said that Miracle's existence caused people to never even try to brew, you were clearly an exception. So let's talk about the 16th place finisher, Lincoln Baxter III, who managed to take bug control lands, or as it is apparently affectionately known by the interwebs, Dr. Evil, to a 16th place finish. So let's talk about this deck. First of all, what is it?
What is it? Well, it's a combo control deck, and it really started out as something. It was just, I had this crazy idea. I was like, I hate when my opponents do things, so I'm just going to play all my favorite cards that make my opponents not able to do that. And that meant like Stifle, Vindicate, Smallpox, Mox Diamond to start powering things out like really aggressively. Crucible of the Worlds to bring Wasteland back. I played Rishadan Port, just like every awful card you could imagine. So you were shoved in one deck with Mishra's Factory as the win condition.
Jeez. So you were like an Esper colored hate package deck, or just like blow up all the things.
Right. I just blow up lands all day, and. It was great. My opponents couldn't do much, but then, I would run out of things to do and they'd finally kill me. So it was clear I needed to change things, which is when I cut white, because Life from the Loam and Crop Rotation are just so much more impactful and inevitable than some of the cards I was working with. So what is it? It's really a collection of my favorite cards, and I try to keep it that way, which is why, I still have 2 copies of Pernicious Deed. I still have, Wasteland and Stifle, and the Dark Depths combo is now actually kind of my favorite thing. Like my little pint glass here is actually Tentacles of Merit Lage, and so that's what it is. But in Magic terms, it's a combo control deck that really wants to run your opponent out of resources and finally kill them, or just kind of like punch a hole for Merit Lage when the time is right, when your opponent can't really deal with that. And figuring that out is kind of like the cool, difficult part of playing the deck.
So this is to quote Patrick Sullivan, this is a very Gerard Fabiano style Sultai cards I love deck.
Exactly.
Sure, and I mean he's done that plenty too. So it's clearly a proven strategy. You just take all the best Sultai cards you like, put them in the same deck, and you're bound to have success, right?
That and all the best lands, because I think lands are actually, ever since I started the game, I started around Tempest in 1996, and that was when Wasteland was a bad card, and Rishadan Port was a bad card, but I just loved all these lands that did stuff. Tolarian Academy, Serra Sanctum, just things that your opponents can't really deal with lands. you can't counter a land. You can stifle the things they do sometimes, but they're just the fact that lands can't be responded to is so powerful. I've always been in love with that play style, which is why even in the Esper version of the deck, I tried to play with Richard and Port and Wasteland and a whole bunch of different utility.
Right, and I mean that part is a very proven strategy in Legacy. Like mana denial and land suppression is a very valid strategy. There's lots of decks throughout the history of the format that have done it. Goblins, Death and Taxes, the actual like red-green combo lands deck, all of the old Eternal Garden, all of those decks did these things. So you're not like venturing into new territory there with the lands package, but your assimilation of all the other parts definitely is unique. So let's move into that. You've already alluded to how Life from the Loam helps with it and sort of is like the engine card of the deck. But how does the deck function? Like what are the key cards that you're using to like push forward your game plan, and then ultimately how do you win the game typically?
Right. So the cool thing about the deck is that it really functions on about 5 or so axes, and given the way your opponent is playing and the way you think they're going to try to finish the game, you can pick the axis that is most likely to disrupt that and be able to come back. So I would say that that and in post-board games, once your opponent has seen one or two of the axes you're going to play on, you can shift to the others and then effectively dodge whatever sideboard they bring in based on what they've seen in the first game and how they feel like the deck's going to play out. Mm-hmm. So those are, roughly speaking, you've got the value package. You can just sort of grind your opponent out with the Snapcasters and Strixes and flashing back Abrupt Decays, getting Liliana online and just sort of run them out of resources. Finally, maybe like landing a Jace to lock out the game. Or you can really try to race to a combo finish, turn 1 Deathrite, turn 2 maybe blow something up or counter something, turn 3, now you're making a 20-20 and you kind of swing in for the kill. The other axis is kind of play the tempo game where you keep your opponent off their lands, you get Loam going, you stifle their fetches, you waste them out, and then finally, sort of once they stop doing things and the life goes out of their eyes, you can start building up your board state and getting something online. And then I think lastly, you've kind of got your more traditional beatdown plan of like Leovold with Garruk Relentless and just sort of like flood the board with things that create value and end up being difficult for your opponent to deal with. So there's really a lot of ways to go, which is cool.
Yeah, no, it sounds like you have flexibility, which is in some ways is incredibly valuable because flexibility in a deck means that you aren't always stone cold to a certain card or a certain strategy. And I've seen your list, and I would say that there's very little that you are just straight cold to. You have the potential for probably about turn 3 combo kill, turn 4 I guess with Merit on the attack, and you also have the pieces, like literally all of the pieces, to answer almost every permanent type and or strategy if they're not something that requires a quick answer. So it works both sides of the paradigm and everything in between. You've got value cards, you've got Deathrite, the best creature in the format. So it's a collection of both powerful individual cards and powerful synergies, it looks like.
Yeah, and I've posted about the deck throughout the years since I've started building it, and I've gotten a couple of responses like, this looks like an unsynergistic pile of garbage, and stuff like, why would you play Brainstorm with Life from the Loam? And it just, Brainstorm with Life from the Loam, let's think about that for a second.
Yeah.
I'm gonna play Life from the Loam and get 3 cards out of my graveyard, 3 lands. I'm gonna play a Brainstorm and draw 3 cards and put 2 lands back on top. Then I'm gonna dredge them away with Life from the Loam. Then I'm gonna do it every turn with Jace.
Right.
Now I'm just casting Ancestral Vision every turn for 2 mana. It's
so you now have the angle that traditional lands doesn't get to do. You get to draw actual spells to go with all of the lands you dredge back from Life from the Loam. So like you can trade in those lands, especially if there's something like fetch lands that you don't really need past like your fourth colored source or your third colored source of mana. So like once you get to that point, then you would actually rather trade them in on real spells anyway. Like in your case, you have Thoughtseizes and Force Wheels and Abrupt Decays. Like you can turn those lands into something that actually kills the stuff on the table, and you're not solely reliant on your lands answering everything.
And I don't have to wait for things to fall into the graveyard in order to find answers, which makes them vulnerable to things like Deathrite or Surgical or any of those types of typical threats that would really shut down a lands deck. And the other thing that the deck runs is Cephalid Coliseum, which was sort of a recent addition, but that card has proven to be so valuable because it gets late in the game. I'm sure everyone has run into that experience where you're just drawing a couple lands and you kind of want to fake out your opponent, so you don't really, put them on the table because you have plenty, and you're just staring at these lands in your hand. Well, with Cephalid Coliseum, you can either just play it and naturally draw it, or maybe you can convert that crop rotation in your hand and turn it into a draw 3. And it does, quote unquote, put you at a disadvantage because you're taking 1 or 2 cards and you're drawing 3, discarding 3, so you're not really netting more cards, but it lets you filter through so many cards that it really just powers you out of the garbage and into the good stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it's the brainstorm effect, right? Like you're drawing cards and then getting rid of the garbage. So like you're not actually up cards, but the quality of what's in your hand has improved dramatically, or hopefully has. So like, yeah, it just, like you said, it's like you aren't up cards, but you're up quality, so you might as well be, right?
Right. And I've never actually done this, but I really want to be able to point Cephalid Coliseum at my opponent while I've got a Leovold out. That's just my dream.
Just to like straight mind twist them?
Yep, just discard 3 cards. Yeah, thanks.
Someday it'll happen, I'm sure.
Yeah.
You play a deck long enough, you get into every scenario, every angle.
There's one other card I want to mention just briefly.
Sure.
Because a lot of people ask me about it. And the card is Stifle, which really has been an MVP in the deck for a couple of reasons. The first of which is this deck, it needs to get to the mid-range. You got to get there, you're going to lose. If you can't get past turn 3 or 4 before the board is flooded and you're just, at too low life to recover, you're not going to make it. So Stifle ends up being a great tempo card. You can think of it like a tempo control deck. You need to sort of slowly find little angles to disrupt your opponent through the first few turns of the game. And Wasteland is great, but it also sets you back on lands. So Stifle ends up being this sort of time walk plus land advantage that is just so huge in making the deck this oppressive, hate-filled, board wipe deck that it wants to be. And late game, once you've gotten to those mid-range and late game turns, it also serves as protection for the combo because most of the things that can deal with the best creature in the game, our favorite 2020 flying indestructible black avatar, are activated or triggered abilities like Caracas, like Wasteland can hit the combo while it's on the stack. Flicker Wisp can obliterate the token. And Liliana or Jace, the Planeswalkers, if you need to block with Merit Lage and then swing back, they can be a blowout when someone goes to bounce your token or something like that. And it just ends up being this amazing piece of tempo and protection. And I never hate having it in my hand.
No, yeah, Stifle's a very underappreciated card. Although it does look like the card's starting to make a comeback finally. For a period of time there, especially since Crixus Delver has risen to prominence, Stifle took sort of a back seat. Now, it was most notable in Rug Delver, which I guess is, in a lot of ways, I feel is the inferior Delver deck. It's definitely better against combo, but it struggles in the Delver matchup, I believe. Like Grixis is probably much better in the pseudo mirror. So more people have defaulted to the Grixis style deck, but they're not typically playing Stifle. So it has sort of fallen out of favor, and I actually think the Rug Delver or Temur Delver player making the top 8 is sort of a testament to what has happened to the meta. You get a person who's really good with Temur Delver, in their element, like in a big legacy scene, and people haven't been playing around Stifle for a while, and they will probably get gotten because you don't know to play around it anymore because it doesn't happen. So
I mean, I got gotten in
Yeah.
round 15, but I didn't have too much choice, right? My first game was a mulligan to 5, which against Rug Delver, you're just sitting there thinking like, oh my god, there's no way I'm going to come back from this, and because they'll punish you for like any lack of resources.
Yep.
But that first game where I mulled to 5, I ended up actually blowing him out with a Pernicious Deed and, coming back and stalling the game out for 6 turns and just not finding anything to do. But then I mulliganed down again the next game and it was over. So it's just a very punishing deck, and Stifle fits so well into that game plan. Yeah. I'm glad to see it come back.
Yeah, I agree. I actually think Stifle's a really awesome card. I know it plays into those like resource denial decks, which are sometimes a little less than fun to play against. But hey, that's Legacy. There's going to be all shapes and sizes and every archetype. So just if you don't like it, then you can play Modern, I guess. But
yeah,
there's no Stifles there.
Well, actually, they just printed. I don't know if you saw the spoiler.
I did.
Spoiled a Stifle on a cycling card.
I'm not convinced that's going to be good enough, but there is one. Maybe they can give it a try.
It's also a 3/1, so you got that. I don't know.
So anyway, we'll get back to your deck instead of talking about other people's Stifles. We know how the deck works, or how you intend for it to work. So let's talk matchups. What are the decks you want to play against? What are Dr. Evil or Bugland Control good matchups?
Good matchups. This is tough because there are so many of them.
Summarize.
I'll summarize and say anything fair. If you're not comboing off to kill me, I am more than likely going to get there, just because my deck plays so unfair with gaining advantage on mana base and card advantage and all that kind of stuff. So like Delver decks, Rug Delver is actually the hardest one just because you have so little time to stabilize. Mm-hmm. But pretty much all the Delver decks, Crixus I think is a close second to Rug Delver, but Stoneblade, I kind of mop the floor with Death and Taxes now because of Pernicious Deed and 2 Pernicious Deeds, 2 Toxic Deluge, Golgari Charm, Liliana. Just the strategy there, you just let them build up a little bit, blow them out, play something, blow them out again, play something. Maverick is a good matchup. Anything that uses the graveyard is an incredible matchup. So like Reanimator, like Black-Red Reanimator is just incredible. The only way I think I can lose that matchup is if they have like turn 1 Thoughtseize me, and then Entomb with Chancellor, so I can't force or anything like that, or can't play a turn 1 answer after they pass the turn to me, and then get a Grizzlebrand out and just draw 14 cards and go off again. That's pretty much the only way to lose against that deck, which is very uncommon for them. Mm-hmm. Dredge is a good matchup. I'll hedge and say that Storm is actually a pretty good matchup because of the main deck Stifles, and then plus Snapcaster Mage, so they can duress you, but half of their hand hate is actually just dead because you just hold the Snapcaster, and when they finally want to go off, you play it, target Stifle in your graveyard, just wait. Elves is sort of medium. It can go either way. If they get if they turn 2, then there's just nothing you can do. But if you make it to turn 3, you can just board wipe them over and over again. Rug Delver, I'd say, is medium. And then for the decks that are really, really hard to play against, actually, sorry, I'm going to add something else to the really great matchup. Mm-hmm. It's almost impossible to lose to Turbo Depths and lands because my deck does everything theirs does, but I get Brainstorm, I still have Crop Rotation, still have Wasteland, and I have Stifle that literally just shuts them down, plus Deathrite eats the graveyard, and it's gross. It's not easy, but if you play it right, it's very hard for them to win. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would think you'd be very well positioned against a deck like that because you're doing a similar thing, but you have the answer cards that they're sort of giving up in order to be even more consistent and fast in their own right, or in their own strategy.
Right, and if they go for if lands goes for a turn 3 Merit Lage off of an exploration or something like that, one of my favorite things to do is just kind of all right, well, I'll Crop Rotate, get my Thespian Stage, copy your Dark Depths. Now we're staring at each other. All right, I'll go get my Caracas or kill it with Liliana or Jace or something, and it's just very. Like if they don't know what they're playing against, it's really dangerous for them because they can try to kill you and just get blown out. It often ends up in just sort of like no one does anything. We just sort of stare at each other until finally someone makes the mistake of going first. And
right, and in the meantime, you actually have the backup plan of like casting a Jace the Mind Sculptor, which is like, unless they have a punishing fire or something to really punish it, or, excuse me, to punish it, whatever. I'll just let the pun happen. Then you're going to like pull way ahead, I would think, in that scenario.
Yep, because then I'm filtering through cards. Leovold is also incredible in that match because punishing fire is a 3-for-1.
Right.
Wasteland just says draw a card. Port says draw a card. It's all just very, very gross.
Neat.
All right,
so what are the bad matchups? Let's talk about those
bad
too.
Matchups. Before you all go out and think this deck's just the best thing ever, which it is, but it does have some downsides. Actually, I'll mention Infect. I know we played in the second to last match.
Round
I think
14.
It was.
Yep.
14, which I was sorry to face you there. I wish we could have faced in the top 8.
It happens.
I'll put Infect on the sort of kind of favored but medium because there's just so many answers, but you still have the option of doing the quick blowout, which like that game 2 where you mulligan down very low, you didn't have a lot of cards and you still got me to 9 Infect in a couple turns, and I was really worried about that. So Infect is medium, I would say.
I was definitely one good draw step away from taking that one, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
But
okay, finally, all right, the weak ones. So I mentioned this earlier, but Burn is just awful. There's no way it doesn't happen. You can't win. And I do win sometimes. That's not to say you can't win ever, but it's just the percentages are so bad.
Mm-hmm.
Omnishow is probably the next worst because the Caracas plan of bringing Emrakul back to their hand is offline.
Mm-hmm.
There's not a lot of main deck counter spells, and they have a lot of main deck counter spells. So that deck is tough. Plus, anytime they get sneak attack online is tough.
Right.
Mono red sneak attack for that same reason is difficult. Probably a little bit easier than Omni Sneak because it doesn't have the counter spells to stop you from just shutting them down sometimes. But it still has the Blood Moons and the Chalices, and fortunately those are often dealt with Abrupt Decay if you can get there, but you're frequently wasting your Force of Will on a Blood Moon, and you really don't want to be.
I was actually just thinking that it feels like, given that you're still a lands style deck, Blood Moon should be a pretty effective hate piece, especially decks that can put it out there both quickly or with backup, like with protection.
Yep. And I recently took out Mox Diamond, which is again the lands part of the deck, and put in Deathrite, which also weakened the game plan against Blood Moon, because now I can't draw out of it as effectively. It used to be I could just hold a land or two in my hand and then draw some Mox Diamonds and sort of play out of it. But now, if a Blood Moon comes down, and I don't have an Abrupt Decay to get rid of it, or the Force, or a Deathrite online, it's really pretty much game over. Or if I haven't fetched my basics. So for that, in that note, Dragon Stompy or anything with 8 Blood Moons is also really difficult, like Imperial
Painter, yeah.
Yeah. But I don't know if there's really much else that I would say is tough. I'm probably blanking on something.
I mean, it's Legacy. There's probably like 40 decks or 50 or more decks. So like, if you forget one or two, we'll forgive it.
Yeah, I think I just named like 15 or 20 decks, but I'm sure there's 80 more.
And for any of you out there who have never got to play against his deck, and if you're on a deck we didn't mention, hopefully someday you do, and you can report back on how good or bad the matchup is for you.
Yeah, feel free to reach out to me and let me know your thoughts. I'd be glad to hear what you think is good against my deck, and also what you're worried about.
And on that note, I feel like we've covered most of the bases. We didn't really hit on sideboard stuff. Let's do that. What are good sideboard cards against your deck? And then knowing that people might have those kind of cards around, the hate pieces and stuff, what do you do, or do you do anything to like counteract the hate?
Oh, that's a good question. I think I think the best sideboard card against my deck is actually Deathrite Shaman. It's not even a sideboard card. It's just really good. It's acceleration. It shuts down a lot of the graveyard stuff that I want to do. So that I'd probably have to be. I'd pick that as number one sideboard. It's just awful. Number two.
Is something like Rest in Peace a pretty good effect to have?
I'd probably have to say Blood Moon, over Rest in Peace. An untimely Rest in Peace can be really problematic, like if I've already committed to the graveyard and maybe dump some combo pieces in there. But for the most part, I try not to do that. So right. I feel like Graveyard Hate is medium because chances are, if I expect it, I'm going to play around it, which the deck can easily do. Hence the fourth copy of Crop Rotation in the sideboard. I'll often just sort of play Crop Rotation instead of Loam, and not use the graveyard except for Deathrite. And sometimes I'll even sideboard out Snapcasters against Death and Taxes because they're just too slow, and they don't do anything, because if Rest in Peace comes online, it's a dead card.
Yeah, and you can pretty reasonably expect that from D&T. They're
right.
gonna be packing Rest in Peace post board because from their perspective, the game has to go long, and your best long-term plan is the resource advantage from the graveyard. So,
and to be fair, they don't have a choice. They have to bring it in, because I'm not going to completely take out the graveyard package, and Cabal Pit, which I don't know if people on the cast know about what this card does. It's disfigure on a land, so you get Threshold, and then you pay a black and tap it to give a creature -2/-2. That just reads game over for Death and Taxes, especially when you combine it with anything like Liliana, because Phyrexian Revoker can't name lands.
Right.
It's colorless, so Mother of Runes doesn't do anything. It just eats them every turn, and there's very little they can do about it. So you have to hate the graveyard against the deck to some extent, but there are it's easier to play around because there's so many options.
And I imagine you already mentioned earlier how you felt Death and Taxes was a strong matchup. But even the new like hate pieces or the new tools that Death and Taxes got from Conspiracy don't seem quite effective enough, because unlike traditional lands where Sanctum Prelate on 2 sort of locks up a lot of their engine game plan, you actually have a fair number of answers at 3 and 4 mana to like go over the top of the Prelate on 2 and get back, release your 2 CMCs again and then start the whole chain over. So
right, I'm never really worried about that card, because there's times where it can be inconvenient, or maybe it is that last kind of lock piece that closes out the game, but for the most part, when it comes down, I'm just like, all right, I'll just do this other thing and kill it, and I just sort of keep going.
Right. So okay, so now we've sort of run the gamut and covered all of the axes of the deck. So let's shift gears, and I'd like to talk about your app and program, and it's called Topdecked. And if
yep.
For those of you who are watching the YouTube cast, you'll notice that both Lincoln and I are wearing the Topdecked T-shirts. I have to thank him for this. He gave me this one, so there we are.
Literally the shirt off his back.
The shirt off his back at the Grand Prix. It was just so we'd have it ready in time for this cast. So anyway, let's talk. What is Topdecked?
So before I talk about Topdecked, I want to talk about why I started Topdecked, because I think that's really important to answering the question of what it is. And the reason I started Topdecked is because I love Legacy. It is my favorite format. I've met some of the best people. I've made some great friends, through Legacy. I would have never met you if I hadn't played Legacy. And it's been like, I've seen Magic help people in ways that I feel like goes kind of under the current sometimes. We all feel like it's this game that we enjoy, and we go to events and compete, and players want to like win prize and all that stuff. But really, the thing that I see in this game is that it is about people coming together to spend time with each other and do something that's like healthy. It grows your brain. It keeps you from like doing drugs and all this kind of other stuff. And I love that about it. And when I've seen Legacy kind of get, I guess, beat down a little bit over the past few years, it's, you know, some of the, I guess I'll call them sponsoring companies that have been promoting Legacy for a long time now have kind of taken a step back. And the community has sort of let out this collective wail of, oh no, you know, don't hurt us like this. And it really is, it's hurting people. I said, okay, this is a problem because there are so many people that love to play this game. And it's such a personal game. People like to play it the way they want to play it. They don't want anyone to tell them, all right, no, you have to play standard now, or you have to play with only these cards. I want to play with the cards I want to play with, which probably gets back to the whole deck brewing thing. But what if there were a way where we could make the community strong enough so that no matter what kind of game you want to play in the Magic ecosystem, you can find people to play with. So I want to play Legacy. All right, well, just down the street, there might be a little Legacy shop that's what they do. And I just never knew about it because they post on their own website. They don't post it on Facebook. There's just so many places people have to check to find Magic. And that creates a couple problems. Number one, it creates this sort of energy drain of like, okay, what am I doing this weekend? All right, maybe I won't play because it's just such a nightmare of finding something. And number two, it creates the problem where the actual tournament organizers, the stores, host events without really doing their diligence and working with the other stores to check to make sure that they're not stepping on anyone's toes. What ends up ultimately happening is they do, and it splits the attendance at both events. They both struggle to fire, and then the community suffers. So Topdecked is built to solve that problem. I want it to be the place people go to find events, register for them, submit their deck lists at the local level, and really bring people together and help bring people into the stores and create that healthy community where people are making friends and you know, having the experience they want to have. So that's a very, very, very long-winded explanation of why Topdecked is, and how it's going to get there is through an event finder that actually has all the events on it, that the stores actually use and keep up to date. There's a side for players and a side for stores that we're working very hard to make sure people are aware of and using. On the player side, it's a deck builder. So a lot of the apps out there have struggled to create a good interface for building decks. And if it's worth it to you to write out your deck list because that's the easiest thing to do, like pen and paper, just filling it out, and it's harder to do it on the computer or on an app, there's something wrong because that's so much work. So I fundamentally worked to make sure that the deck builder was easier than pen and paper, and that it was a pleasant experience. Once you've done that, it'll actually print your deck sheet for you, so you don't have to write it. You can just print out a PDF. You can email it. You can share it with your friends over social media. And if the store you go to is participating, you can actually just submit electronically and never have to fill out a piece of paper.
Yeah, and if you don't mind me interrupting here, that's actually something you've seen some of the like really major tournament organizers, places like Channel Fireball and Star City Games, and those like really behemoths of the tournament organizer world. They have slowly been moving into like more like electronic submission or online, but a lot of times it's still very it's kind of like the motto of tournament of physical tournaments, where like it's a step to the modern era, but it's still somehow like 10 years behind everything else software wise. Like it's like it feels really wrong to be like typing my deck list in an email that I'm sending to somebody from the company. Like the interface just feels like it should exist. You should be able to look up cards just like you do on TCG Player or whatever. Like when you're trying to like it should auto correct the spelling and that kind of stuff. And it just prior to your app, I'd never seen anything that did it, and none of the websites or the organizers really had it. And it just I agree with you. It felt like there was an ease of use problem. Like there's definitely something that was missing. So
You try to use a thing, and you're like, all right, well, that didn't work. That didn't work. All right, I'll just write it out and bring it with me. It's not worth it.
Let's go in a little deeper. What are all, you sort of alluded to like the deck builder and the event finder and stuff, but what all functions really does the app have?
One of the other things it does is pairings. So both at local events, local participating events, obviously, and championship level events, premier events like Grand Prix, you will get your pairings pushed to your phone as a mobile alert. So you never have to look at a website or look yourself up or try to find yourself in a list. It just shows up on your phone if you've got your name and your GCI number filled out in the app. And that works today. We actually ran an early access preview of that at Grand Prix Las Vegas, and it went very well. We had 50 people roughly start with it at the beginning of the event, and by the end of the event, about 300 people had gotten on the app. So it spread pretty quickly, which I'm happy about.
Yeah, and I'll take credit for that. I was definitely talking about it the entire time. I had my phone on me. Well, not during matches. You're not allowed to do that. But between matches and after matches and whatever, I definitely showed a lot of people and said, hey, check it out. Here's my pairings. You have fun up at that board with the other like 300 people trying to read it. I'm gonna just hang out here and read it on this app.
I appreciate that.
It was great. It worked really well. I was impressed.
It helped me out a lot because I was actually, there with my laptop trying to make sure everything went smoothly. So between rounds, I was like checking the logs and making sure everything was running. And it gave me enough time that I could just sort of like finish my match, open up my computer and sit there. And then my phone would buzz at me. Oh, all right, it's time for the next round. I'd close my computer and, pack it up and move to my table. So it really reduced the stress of like rushing to the board and crowding around and trying to find my name. Well, I was really excited about that.
Yeah, I feel like in some ways it's going to improve like tournament if it continues to function that well, or even if you find ways to make it even better yet, that it will actually speed up tournaments, because people don't realize that, I don't think, when they're at big events like Grand Prix or like Star City's Open Series and stuff, but the time between when they make the announcement that the pairings are going to the pairings boards till everyone is like seated and the clock actually begins running, sometimes there's like closing in on 10 minutes of time spent there.
Yep.
And I think of that 10 minutes, maybe 2 minutes of it is people actually walking to their seat. So that other 8-minute lag is just like people fighting to get to the pairings board so they can actually see where they're supposed to go. And that's such an incredible waste of time. 8 minutes sounds like nothing when you have like one round, but none of these events are one round. They're like
10 rounds. That's 8 times 9 is, what is that?
80 or 8 times 9 is 72. So it's like an hour and 15 minutes. Like that's a whole over an hour wasted just on trying to sit down for your match.
Right.
And we won't even go into like overtime and all that wastes even more time. But like that's just getting games started.
Right, but then there's other things we can do too, right? Pairings is just the first step. So obviously we're working on this locally at the store level, so we can really prove out the concept and get the system working smoothly before we start rolling it out to bigger events and trying to partner up with some of the larger tournaments. But think about how long it takes to collect results.
Oh yeah.
Players can do that over the phone. If both players agree, you have no problem. You sign the sheet anyway, you walk it up. But if that's all in the system, then there's less work for the people typing stuff in. There's some complication there, but that's a potential avenue to explore at least. There's also the issue where you have people who've lost or who have not turned in their match slip, and you need to contact them. Instead of having to go over the loudspeaker, you can just message those specific people and say, we need your match result to start the next round. It gets them in a little faster. And then one of the other ideas is, one of the things people have trouble with is they want to go get food or run off between rounds. They finish a few minutes early. Why not have an end of round alert saying the timer has just expired, so get ready to start thinking about coming back, and then also have an alert when all the match slips are in and the round is about to begin. So you could really start to make it less stressful for people to know like the timing of things and where they need to be and when, which is one of the things that I hear all the time from players. about just the massive wear that these big events put on you.
Yeah, and you're right. That is exceptionally noteworthy at large events where the turns or the overtime segment of a round tends to be pretty long or pretty lengthy. Like I don't think a single round at Las Vegas didn't go to 10 plus minutes overtime, right? Like every single round did that, and some of them went, like there was one judge call that took like over half an hour to, like till everything was resolved, and like that, like you said, that's a lot of stress on the players who are nearby. Like they might want to go out and have a smoke, or they might want to go get some food, or just whatever. Like they don't want to have to stand in the convention hall waiting and perpetually refreshing their phone hoping the results come up, or staring at the clock watching it count to half an hour or more of overtime.
Right, and I think that if you start to sort of shave off these inefficiencies and make the system run smoother overall, you can start doing things like say, okay, the round is 50 minutes, but we're not going to start the next round until an hour from this round start. Just build in a 10-minute buffer. You're going to use it anyway, but with better communication, you can actually turn that into a little more time for the bathroom or time to pick up a snack or a drink or something like that. And I think that's just a thing for everybody, because we love this game, but playing at these events is very stressful.
It is. It's not only like mentally and physically taxing being at your mat playing Magic for like 9 hours and being in the same place, you know, seated, like just thinking critically and all that, but also just like you said, the stress of all of the ancillary non game or non Magic like competition things that go into it is just like feels kind of unnecessary, and like we alluded to earlier, there's certainly aspects that, like, if you modernize enough, you think those should fall by the wayside.
Yep.
So anyway, you sort of started into this topic already, but let's say, like, where is the app going from here? Or what are some future avenues that you see? And I'm going to also throw in, if anyone has a good idea or something that they think that could benefit this kind of an app, how do they tell you?
Excellent question. I'll handle that last one first.
Okay.
If you have an idea or feedback about the app, you can, number one, download the app. There's a feedback button right in the main menu. Just click it and it'll send that feedback directly to the team. And we read every single one of them and we reply to every single one of them. So don't be shy about using the feedback feature. You can also email me directly at lincoln@topdecked.me. That's totally cool. I would love to hear from you. And so I think your question was, where is the app going?
Yeah, what are the new features going to be, or what do you see as like the future of Topdecked? Right.
So the future of Topdecked, I am very excited about. There are a couple things I can tell you. First, the biggest goal that I have is I want Topdecked to be the place people go to find and register for events. Like, if you want to figure out what's going on in your city or your town, and you're trying to figure out what to do this weekend, or you're looking for a competitive event, Topdecked is your answer. And you can go to the website now. It's topdecked.me, or use the app. They both have an event finder that'll search around you, or you can choose your location and search. And that is the first step in solving the problem of event density and overscheduling and basically splitting the community in ways that make it hard for our local game stores to host successful events.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're headed for like the primary goal. There are some other goals that we have that I can't talk too much about, but they're all focused on making the local Magic scene stronger, making it easier for the game stores to get people into the shops. So one of them that I can talk about is event alerts. So you can kind of set your preferences and say, okay, I'm interested in modern and standard, and I would be willing to drive up to 20 minutes to an event to play, and pretty much anytime. So when we roll out this feature, you'll be able to set those preferences, and then our system will, again, send you a notification on your phone. It'll look something like this. These are actually my notifications from the Grand Prix that I haven't deleted yet because I'm sentimental.
Yeah.
And it'll just say, okay, there's a new modern tournament 15 minutes away from you at this store. 30 other people have registered. Would you like to go? And really try to make it easier for people to see who's doing what and what events are likely to fire, because part of the issue that players have when they choose to go to an event is they don't know if it's going to be worth their time. They drive even 20 minutes, 40 minutes, upwards of an hour to get to an event, and 7 people show up. They're not going to go back.
Yeah, it's disheartening, that's for sure.
That's something we have to solve, and I think that this set of features is going to really help with that.
So that sounds like a very tournament organizer oriented future. And quickly, if you're a tournament organizer and you're interested in the app or getting involved in using it, where would they go? The same website, or is there something separate for TOs versus players?
You can get in touch with us through any of the methods I've already mentioned, or you can also go to topdecked.me and click the stores link at the top, and that'll take you to a form where you can fill in your information. And we haven't rolled out early access to a whole lot of stores yet because we're still working on a lot of that stuff, but we're slowly bringing it out. So if we haven't gotten to you yet, I'm sorry. And if you submit, we hope to get to you soon.
Awesome.
And you mentioned TO-centric, and there is a lot of this that we want to do to try to help stores, because stores really are they're the people who have bought into this community too, right? That's their job. They've purchased real estate. They've invested money into building up an inventory of cards and running these events and taking that risk. So I do want to help players. I also want to help stores. And I think that like we can help stores bring players in, we can also help players in a way that meets that goal as well. So one of the things we're working on is a Play Now feature where you can say, I want to play Modern tonight. Who else wants to come? And it's kind of like sets your beacon. It doesn't show where you are because there's lots of privacy issues with that, but it'll say, there are 3 other people around you who want to play Modern tonight, or Commander, or Pauper, or something like that. This is the closest store to you. You guys should head there. And,
awesome. That's a great idea.
And that's something we're going to roll out pretty soon. And it really, that one kind of depends on how many people are using the app and like trying out that feature, because you can easily end up somewhere where you're the only person around and it just doesn't do anything for you. But if we get enough people on there and the community kind of buys into this idea of like we can be better together and we can really help grow together, I think that can really help bring not only the like kind of the wacky people back into the circle, but the new people who don't really know what to do or who to play with yet. We can just kind of start bringing people back into the fold and tightening up the community that I think has really been struggling in the last few years to figure out, how do we play, when, where, which store, that kind of stuff.
Awesome. No, that sounds great. I like all of these ideas and more. So I'm eager to see what else unfolds in the next months and years, I'm sure, of development with the app. So
there's one more teaser I'll throw out there, which is that we are working on something around cards, and I want to actually stay away from trading and selling and being this kind of card marketplace, because it's been done. I don't think it's really beneficial to the community in a lot of ways, but we are working on something along those lines that is a very different take on those types of systems. It's not going to meet the same need. Those systems will still have their place, but this is going to be something that I think will bring players back into the stores and help the local stores and local players with cards. I'll just put it that way.
Awesome. Wow, this is going to be a one-stop shop for everything from casual to competitive to tournaments and whatever. That's great.
Hopefully.
Right on. Well, Lincoln, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk with us today, both about your deck and the app. This episode as a whole has been a bit of a mixed bag, but I think it was really informative, and we got some great material. So thank you very much for joining us and sharing with us both your insight on your deck and on the work you do for the Magic community.
Thank you, Zach. It's been a pleasure. I've always enjoyed your videos, even before we met, and it's really cool to be here and doing this with you. So thank you very much.
And no problem, man. It was really fun. And thank you to all of our listeners and viewers. It has been my pleasure to bring you this episode of Legacies of Allure. If you like what you heard today, please subscribe, and feel free to leave us feedback on our YouTube page, or you can message me directly at mtgtraininggrounds@gmail.com. Like us on Facebook at the user MTG Training Grounds, or subscribe to the podcast on iTunes. I am your host, Zachary Cuck. Thank you for joining.